Hello everyone. I'm from Kyoto University, and I'm a chemical engineer. So in this session, maybe this topic is a little bit weird. It doesn't suit to some other kind of presentation on the therapy or something. This is perfectly engineering work. But it's related to the drug production. Then, okay, how can I? Okay, the agenda of this presentation is, at first, I briefly explain in view of the sustainability of my work, and this is a topic on the freeze drying. It's also called lyophilization, and I'm targeted on the humidity-induced-collapse, and I explain what is it. And another part is a little bit complicated. It's a mathematics things. Anyway, okay, how can I go back? Okay, so this is a procedure. The industry produce drug, and it's gonna deliver to the consumers. So at first, API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, will be produced in the chemical industry. Otherwise, big pharma company can produce by themselves in their chemical plant. Anyway, this API is delivered to the pharma industry. Then the pharma industry treats them, purify or solubilize and filtrate or something. And then it formulation, meaning of the formulation is API. Usually we put very small amount of API. Then we need to put some other stabilizer. Stabilizer is a major component of the drugs, so we need to formulate them. Then after that, we process it. In some cases, the drug is in liquid form. Another case is dried form. For considering the long-term storage, it's better to make dry form. But drying give a lot of stress to the API. So we should avoid in the case of the too sensitive APIs. So in the case of the COVID, the development period of the drug production, it takes nearly 1 year or something. It's extremely short. But the final form of the drug is liquid form, and it's frozen, and it delivered by keeping the temperature, it's around -80 or -40. It's incredible. So in the future, it's pretty sure we should convert all these drugs in dried form. But we need to think about all these, we need to follow all these procedures. At first, API, and it delivered to the industry, then pre-treatment, formulation, and production, something like drying, and storage. The storage in pharma industry is perfectly controlled. But if it's delivered to the clinic or the hospital or the consumer, we should think about we should assure the storage during all these delivery process. It's very difficult to control the delivery condition during for example, if we keep the temperature low enough, or we should keep the low humidity, but how we can assure? Maybe we need to think about it. And today I'm focusing on the quality assurance in the part of storage, but it's very limited part. Okay, then freeze drying it's known as the best drying method in terms of the keeping its quality, but it's worse in terms of the energy consumption, because it contains freezing and also drying. The freezing, it is a kind of solidification. So there is a phase transition. So we need to pay the energy for the freezing. And another step is drying. So we remove water. So there is another part of the phase transition. So we should pay again for that phase transition. Then finally, we can get a freeze-dried product. It may be perfect. It may be sub-API must be stabilize in this freeze-dried form. But it's not perfect. Then the feature of the freeze-dried pharmaceutical product is one important thing is it makes highly porous media. So after we put some buffer solution to the freeze-dried drugs, it's easily reconstituted. So it's ready to use. So it's ready for the injection. So it's important feature. Important feature is first is porous media. It makes porous media. So it allows the very good reconstitution, and also we can keep the very high retention of the sensitive biological activities. And it's also it has another benefit is that it has excellent storage ability because of we can keep very low moisture content. But if we open the freeze-dried form and put it on the table, for example, then some minutes later or some hours later, it's gonna absorb moisture and it breaks like this. Then what I want to do, I want to present in this presentation is how we can assume, how we can calculate the time period to make this collapse. So it seems kind of a silly thing, but it's not. We still have a difficulty. There is no theoretical background to accurately calculate how the dynamics is controlled. Then this is a literature review of the humidity-induced collapse. It's a drug, one AMP is packed in ampoule, glass ampoule. SCV is a freeze-dried one and capped with screwed cap or rubber cap. Then in the case of ampoule, the storage stability is perfect. The moisture content doesn't increase over 8 weeks. But in the case of normal capped one is usually, it's capped with a rubber cap, and we can directly inject to the rubber cap, through the rubber cap, and we can introduce the buffer solution, and we can directly use it for the injection. But in the case of the capped one, the moisture content slowly increase. So this increase of the moisture it's directly related to the storage ability. So if we buy freeze-dried drugs, if we place 2 months, for example, if the condition is not maintained well, there is a risk of the damage of the drugs. So, okay, one important thing is it must be that we should keep the good condition for the storage, but how we can assure of it. Then we need a model here. But before that, before the modeling, we should know what is the controlling factor of this humidity-induced collapse. Then one important thing is a glass transition. Glass transition is, for example, the formulation, pharmaceutical formulation is a mixture of a lot of glassy material, something like sugar species or the synthesized polymer that has a glass transition that has glass transition behavior with moisture. Then if a drug start to absorb, or we should say the stabilizer of the drugs. If a material start to absorb the moisture, then if it's reached at the glass transition point, then it's immediately start the collapse. So that's one thing. So we should know the kinetics of the moisture sorption and how long does it take to reach at the glass transition point. So that's a controlling factor. Then this literature had experimental work, and this literature successfully that show something like, they called stability map. The temperature and the relative humidity were shown in this line. This is shown in this line. If a product is kept under these conditions, it doesn't make collapse, they said. But they don't mention anything about the kinetics. How long does it take? We want to know how long does it take to make humidity-induced collapse. So this is experimental data that my student carried out several years ago. Then he freeze-dried maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is it's not a pharmaceutical thing. It's a kind of food stuff, and it's hydrolyzed to starch. Then depending on the degree of the hydrolysis, then we can control the glass transition temperature. So it's very useful for the experimental purpose. So I used it. Then one is higher glass transition temperature, and another one has lower glass transition temperatures. So it means it easily start glass rubber transition. So it gets moist, and we can imagine something like a cracker. If cracker is crispy and it's tasty, then if it starts to absorb moisture, that crispiness is reduced. So it's a kind of, it's directly related to the glass transition, glass rubber transition. Then if it gets moist much more, then the crispiness is perfectly removed from the cracker. So it's gonna be liquid. So anyway, let's go back to the freeze-dried maltodextrin. Then these pictures were shown as a function of the time. If we waited for long for the case of the upper one, it doesn't make any collapse, but instead of this one, it makes collapse in 10 minutes or something. So I want to calculate this one. So let's at first summarize what is a key factor to make humidity-induced collapse. At first, the moisture sorption equilibrium is we can get it by experiment, and this is one feature of the matrix. So it shows at the selected relative humidity, the maximum amount of water that can be solved in a matrix it's all described in this figure. It's a feature of the equilibrium property of the material. The another part is a glass transition property. So that in which temperature, at which moisture content, glass rubber transition occurs. That's the property of the glass transition. It's also a kind of equilibrium property of the matrix. Then another part what we need to model is we need to make theory is a kinetics of the sorption. So okay, then I hurry about to, anyway, this sorption kinetics, glass rubber transition property, and the sorption equilibrium data, then using a model and try to calculate something like this. Something like a relationship interaction of the period to solve water to make humidity-induced collapse as a function of relative humidity and temperature. So let's show. Okay, moisture sorption isotherm is something like this. We could measure it by experiment. I don't talk about the detail of the experimental procedure. Anyway, we can get this data and we can fit it with this equation to describe this sorption equilibrium. So that's okay. Then another part is a glass rubber transition line. That also we can measure it by experiment by using DSC or some other method. I don't talk detail about it. Anyway, this equilibrium data, a kind of equilibrium data, it's not exactly equilibrium. It's a super cooling. Anyway, I don't talk detail about the glass transition. And at least we can get this line by using this equation. We can express the glass transition behavior by using this equation. Then another one very difficult part is the sorption kinetics. So this is experimental data of the sorption kinetics, but in the case of if we apply higher relative humidity, there is rapidly soft water. If the relative humidity is lower, then it's slower. But how we can calculate? We can get the quantitative data instead of the qualitative estimation. So this is the modeling part. Then, always there is moisture. Moisture try to attack on the interface of the material. Then some part of the moisture is absorbed in the matrix. How it can be determined? One part is we assume that the capacity of the sorption, so some amount of the moisture can be solved in the matrix. But if there is water already solved in the matrix, the capacity becomes lower. So that capacity of the moisture is in relationship. It's linearly related to the sorption kinetics. That's one of the assumptions. Another part of the assumption is it attacks on the surface, but not all the moisture absorbed to the matrix. So I give here the probability of the sorption. So the probability of the sorption is a kind of fitting parameter. We need to decide it with the experimental data, but at least by defining this probability of the sorption, then we can express this kind of this equation. So the velocity of the sorption of the water is in relation to the capacity, remaining capacity of water sorption, and combined with the probability of the sorption. Then mu is it can be obtained by the kinetic theory. The molecules are traveling in the space, and with the number of water molecules colliding per second on one unit of the surface area can be described with this equation. Then combining this equation, we can get the velocity of sorption. Then the matrix is a porous media. So it has a lot of specific surface area. So that overall sorption rate can be described with this equation. Then we combine with it. Then we can get this equation, this red. The equation with the red color is our model. So let's calculate. Combine with these three relationships all together, then this is a result. Then if we place our matrix in this zone, it doesn't make the humidity-induced collapse. It's determined by the glass transition property, but it's okay. So another important part is the kinetics. For example, we have a matrix with certain glass transition temperature, and if we place this one at 30 degrees Celsius at the humidity 80%, it's extremely high. Then this estimation says after 4 hours, this matrix starts collapse. Then this can be applied to another matrix with different glass transition temperature. Then if the glass transition temperature is higher, then the stable zone is wider, and also the kinetics is different from the previous one. And if we apply it to the another matrix, then the result is different. So so the conclusion is we can calculate, and please let me say this is a kind of modeling work, engineering work, but it can be applied for many other type of drug formulation. Then it may be necessary for the future sustainability. We produce and a lot of medical scientists develop and find their new API, but we need to deliver it to the consumers. And what we need next is qualitative understanding of dynamic phenomena under fluctuating temperature. I made this model and with the assumption of temperature is constant with the constant humidity. But it's not the case of real world. Real world is temperature goes up, go down, but there is no theory that we can apply for the case of the fluctuating conditions. And a tool or system to assure product quality throughout the processing, packaging, storage, delivery, storage until use is really necessary. But we need to touch it. But I think it's our engineering part of work. I still have, okay. Then I close my talk. Thank you very much.